Jake Monroe had always been alone, and he liked it that way because people were complicated and messy, and they always left in the end, so why bother getting close to anyone in the first place? He lived in a small cabin deep in the woods of Oregon, where the trees were tall and the nights were quiet, and the only company he had was the stars above, and the occasional deer that wandered through his property. He worked as a freelance software engineer, which meant he could live anywhere and do his job from his laptop and never have to see another human face if he didn't want to. And most days he didn't want to. One night in late autumn, when the air was crisp and the leaves had turned gold and red, Jake heard a sound that didn't belong in his quiet forest home. It was a loud crash followed by a bright flash of blue light that lit up the entire sky and made the trees cast long, strange shadows across the ground. Jake grabbed his flashlight and his jacket and headed out into the woods, following the source of the light because curiosity was stronger than his desire to stay safe and alone. He walked for about 20 minutes through the dense forest until he came to a clearing where he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. There in the middle of the clearing was a ship, but not like any ship he had ever seen before because it was sleek and silver and covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with a soft blue light. The ship was damaged badly, with one side crumpled inward and smoke rising from several panels that sparked and hissed with energy. Jake stood there frozen for a long moment because his brain was trying to process what his eyes were seeing and failing spectacularly. Then he heard a sound that made his heart jump because it was a voice and it was calling out weakly from inside the ship. He rushed forward without thinking and found a door, or what looked like a door, and it slid open with a soft hiss when he touched it. Inside the ship, the air smelled strange, like ozone and flowers and something else he couldn't identify. Lying on the floor was a girl, or at least she looked like a girl, except her skin had a faint lavender tint, and her eyes were far too large and a deep violet color that seemed to glow in the dim light. Her hair was long and silvery white, and it seemed to move on its own like it was alive or floating in water, even though there was no wind. She looked up at him and her eyes went wide with fear, and she tried to scramble backward, but she winced in pain and grabbed her side where Jake could see purple blood seeping through her white suit. "Hold on," he said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you, are you okay?" The girl stared at him for a long moment, and then she spoke, but the words were strange and musical, and he couldn't understand a single syllable. She seemed to realize this, and touched something on her wrist, and suddenly, when she spoke again, the words made sense. "Please," she said, her voice soft and scared. "I need help. My ship is broken and I cannot fix it alone. And if I do not leave soon, they will find me." "Who will find you?" Jake asked, kneeling down beside her. But she just shook her head. "I cannot explain. There is no time," she said, and tried to stand, but her legs gave out and Jake caught her before she fell. "Okay?" "Okay," he said gently. "You're hurt, let me help you back to my cabin. I have a first aid kit and we can figure out what to do about your ship." She looked at him with those impossibly large violet eyes, and something in them made his chest tighten because he saw fear. "Yes, but also a desperate kind of hope. My name is Zara," she said quietly. "Jake?" he replied and carefully helped her to her feet. Over the next few hours, Jake learned that Zara was from a planet called Altheria, which was many light years away, and she had been running from something she called the Collectors, who hunted her people for reasons she didn't want to explain. She had crashed on Earth by accident when her ship malfunctioned during a jump through space. Jake cleaned the wound on her side, which wasn't as bad as it looked, and wrapped it with bandages, while Zara explained what was wrong with her ship. "The core regulator is damaged," we said, pointing to a diagram she had drawn on a piece of paper, "and without it, I cannot generate enough power to leave your planet's atmosphere." "Can you fix it?" Jake asked. "Not without the right materials," she said sadly. "On my world, we have technology that could repair it in minutes, but here I do not know where to find what I need." Jake thought for a moment and then said, "What if I help you? What do you need exactly?" Zara looked surprised, like she hadn't expected him to offer, and then she listed off several items that sounded impossible, but Jake was good at solving problems and he wasn't about to give up. Over the next 3 days, Jake and Zara worked together to fix her ship. Jake drove to nearby towns and bought or borrowed or improvised the materials they needed while Zara stayed hidden in his cabin. because he knew the world wasn't ready to meet someone like her. They worked late into the nights with Zara teaching Jake about her technology and Jake teaching her about Earth and humans and life in general. Jake found himself talking more than he had in years, telling Zara about his past and why he lived alone and how he had built walls around himself because he was afraid of being hurt again. Zara listened without judgment, and when he finished, she said, "On my world, we have a saying that translates to a heart that hides is a heart that dies." She told him about her own loneliness, about how she had been running for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have a friend. On the third night, as they were installing the final piece of the repair, Zara suddenly stopped and looked at Jake. "I do not want to leave," she said quietly. Jake felt his chest tighten again because he didn't want her to leave either, but he knew she had to. "You have to," he said gently. "They're looking for you, right? And you can stay here forever." "I know," she said, and her eyes shimmered with something that looked like tears. "But I have been alone for so long, and these past few days with you have been the happiest I can remember." Jake reached out and took her hand, which was warm and soft despite its strange color. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "You have me, and even if you have to go, well, find a way to stay in touch. Somehow." Zara smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever seen. The next morning they finished the repairs and Zara prepared to leave. She stood at the edge of the clearing with her hand on the ship's door and looked back at Jake. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for helping me and for reminding me that there is still kindness in the universe." Jake nodded because he didn't trust himself to speak without his voice breaking. Zara hesitated, and then she walked back to him and wrapped her arms around him in a tight embrace. "Come with me," she whispered into his ear. Jake pulled back and looked at her in shock. "What? Come with me?" she repeated. "There is so much universe to see, and I do not want to see it alone anymore. I want to see it with you." "But I can't just leave," Jake said, even though his heart was screaming at him to say yes. "What about my life here?" "What life?" Zara asked gently. "You said yourself that you have been hiding, that you have been alone. Do you want to stay alone? Forever?" Jake looked around at the forest that had been his prison and his sanctuary for so long, and then he looked back at Zara, at her violet eyes full of hope and possibility. "No," he said, "finally I don't want to be alone anymore." Zara's face broke into a brilliant smile, and she took his hand. "Then come with me," she said, "and let us be not alone together." Jake Monroe had always been alone, but as he climbed into that silver ship with Zara and felt it lift off the ground, carrying him away from Earth and toward the stars, he realized that being alone had never been what he wanted at all. What he wanted was right here, holding his hand as they flew into the unknown together. And for the first time in his life, Jake felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.